So Sun is a private investment firm. We are based in Delhi, although we look at investments in other parts of the world as well. My focus has been largely on renewable energy and technology sectors in India. Private investors are not any different from, maybe you yourself as an individual investor. Private investors are looking for the same thing, maximizing the return for their risk appetite or minimizing their risk for a particular return that they expect. So I always feel any investment in renewable energy or clean technology is like a three-legged stool. The three elements being: one, the maturity and the viability of the technology; two is the public policy; and three is the investor, who would look for return and commensurate risk. Now, different investors have different appetite for different technologies. A venture capital would typically invest in a riskier technology but expect a commensurately higher return. But most of the private capital would like to invest in those technologies which are proven and don't want to take the technology risk. So that's the first part, the technology arm. The role of the public capital or government here is to ensure the availability of the mature or risk-free technology, as well as to provide the so-called funding gap. If an investor, private capital, is looking for a mid-teen return and they have alternate opportunities to invest and get those kind of returns, then it wouldn't make sense for them to take that kind of a cut in their return, because their investors are looking for that kind of return. And that's where the public capital can come in and act as a catalyst to either somehow sweeten the return, even temporarily, or somehow mitigate the risk. And so hence these three elements: the public policy, the technology, and the private capital. The other aspect is the scaling up effect. Once you do invest in clean technology and you have a substantial scale, then like any other business, there is supposed to be economies of scale that hopefully slide down the costs and make those investments over a period of time much more economical and much more attractive. So to summarize, what the private capital will look from the policymakers is: one, ensuring availability of low-cost mature technologies; two, a certain form of subsidies that would enhance the return in the near term; and number three, ways of mitigating or reducing the riskiness of the investment, which could be done by levers like first loss instruments that the government or public capital can bring in, or certain supplemental financing instruments that can improve the returns for the private capital. Well, if you look at the renewable energy sector, out of the 5 areas: wind, solar, biomass, hydro, and biofuels, which are the typical sectors for renewable energy, and then the other is energy efficiency, bulk of the investment in India has gone to wind and solar. The reason for that is policy. In case of wind, Indian government has had this policy for accelerated depreciation that gives you incentives on the tax. Hence, it's no surprise that over the last 8 to 9 years, there has been massive investment in wind in India, almost about $5 to $6 billion a year. And also, I must point out that the technology of wind has been fairly mature and cost effective. So it speaks to my earlier point that for private capital to flow in, you need the technology, availability of technology, mature technology at cheap rates, and a certain policy driver. In case of solar, the same thing happened. I was privileged to be part of the Prime Minister's action plan on climate change and the solar mission that we put in place about 2 years ago. And again, once the technology became cost effective enough and mature, that was the first lever. And with the national plan, the national policy that offered a pretty attractive tariff, all of a sudden you have seen a huge deluge of activity in solar, and within a year, India has developed roughly 1,000 megawatts of solar. And we have, I think, invested roughly $4 to $5 billion in the last year in solar. Now compare that with rest of technologies like biomass or small hydro that have received probably 1/100th of that kind of money. So again, it's the policy as well as the maturity of the technology. While hydro, biomass also have mature technologies, but from a policy perspective, they are not attractive enough. The third element perhaps for large capital is the scale. Both wind and solar offer substantial amount of scale for a large private capital to flow in. Small hydro and biomass, and to some extent biofuels, don't have that kind of scale attraction. Well, we made several investments, but the one that we would like to highlight is a solar project that we have completed in Gujarat, which is a state in northwestern part of India, and actually is one of the most business friendly states as well. And what the government of Gujarat has done is they have developed what they call a solar park with help from ADB. This solar park is about 5,000 hectares of land that would not have been of any other use. In context of India, it's important that you don't usurp land that could be used for agriculture. So this was really a wasteland. And they did all the infrastructural elements in terms of developing the land, securing the land, ensuring there was a fence and security around it, and establishing grid connectivity to this piece of land to the nearest grid. And it's almost like a mall that is set up with all the infrastructure, water, drainage and everything. And all we needed to do was to set up shops in that kind of mall. And so we had a 25 megawatt PPA, power purchase agreement, with the Gujarat government, and we completed the phase 1, 6 megawatts recently, which is a project that was done in the shortest period of time from Indian solar project standpoint. And I'm glad to inform you it's the best performing project in the state of Gujarat. So we are generating 6 megawatts a year, and the beauty of solar is once you have deployed it, there is hardly any operational maintenance other than washing the panels. Well, what was intriguing to me is that I mentioned earlier, in India, bulk of private capital goes in wind and solar, and not a whole lot has gone into other technologies like biomass or small hydro, even energy efficiency. I was quite surprised to learn in Philippines the reverse is the case. Most of the private capital feels fairly secure in investing in small hydro, biomass and energy efficiency, while the couple of banks which are represented in this workshop are fairly reluctant to invest in solar and wind. And so I think one of the next steps and outcome for something like this could be a forum where you could bring the private sector financiers, especially the banks, and do a little round table for the region for them. And the banks out here could understand how the Indian investors or Indian banks are thinking when they're investing in solar and wind. The Indian financial institutions can learn from the ones out here, which feel much more comfortable investing in the technologies that the Indian financial institutions have been quite reluctant, and that would be a win-win for the region.